Approach all things.
With reason.
Reason.
Reasonable.
Dissent.
Reasonable Dissent with the BlackWolf and Kopus Mellini.
We were talking in our last conversation about the control of information. And I'm not an expert by any means in this area, but this is just what I see as far as potential problems. I think it's going to come down to choices that we're going to have to make as a nation. Are we really willing to tear ourselves apart, chasing after ghosts of ideas, chasing after, I think you're guilty of something that I have no proof of? Are we really willing to destroy this nation based on that? Or are we going to, or do we really want to continue to be a nation from here on out?
What are the benefits of being a united nation? That's the question I ask myself, because I know, I feel like there's a lot of dialogue about unity and sticking together and how, we got to keep this country, this experiment, this melting pot together because it's the best thing that the world's got to offer.
Yeah.
But what about moving on? What if it's not?
Well, moving on, I think that
I guess the immediate threat would be China or Russia or another world power.
Here's what we end up with, okay? We're already in the middle of this us versus them idea, which is it's us Americans versus the Mexicans. It's us Americans versus the Chinese. It's us Americans versus the Russians, and us versus whoever. And I think that what ends up happening is that the worst of the worst, they want to bring the us versus them and bring it home to me versus you. And I think that the problem of a nation like ours fracturing and separating is that we already, Houstonians, we have our joke about, it's a New Yorker. He's from California. He's from out of state, and that's why he drives the way he does.
Sure.
Right? But the problem is, it's one thing to have the jokes about it, it's another thing to have animosity.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is the next step after fracturing, is animosity.
Because I have this idea that we already are fractured, and the next civil war is going to be fought in the courtroom. It's not going to be fought on the battlefield. And this concept of, the riots that we got going on inside the street, I think they're largely manufactured. I think that Antifa can be found in both. Let me scrap the word Antifa. And use the word government agents can be found in both the right protest and the left protest. And that most Americans are actually peaceful. But once you start a mob mentality and you create a little bit of violence, and there's a bunch of young people that haven't really created their own boundaries yet, they're going to be led into acts that they normally wouldn't do. So I feel like the general population doesn't want any violence. They might.
That's true. But here's the thing. Nietzsche said this. He said, you take one man and you put him in a crowd, he'll sacrifice his own mind for the mind of the crowd.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and he's describing mob mentality. He's describing herd mentality, herd behavior, and is absolutely accurate. But what most people don't realize is that, except for those who are in control, who are actually controlling the mob as it is, when you have a crowd of people, this is a single animal unto itself, though it's made of animals. Okay? It's like a school of fish. The whole school moves on its own as a single autonomy.
Okay.
Okay? As a single mind. Right? Even though it's made up of individuals, and each of those individuals can do as it pleases, the mob will do what it chooses, whether or not the individual chooses to be a part of it. And the thing is, if you really want a mob to do that, remember I talked in the last conversation about the political spectrum not being a linear spectrum but a circular spectrum? Right? You have to keep them toward the bottom end of it. You have to keep the mind of the people toward the bottom end of it. Us versus them, you're not of the right class, that type of thing. Keep them from thinking. That way you can tell them what to think.
Well, that's why most of these movements, political movements that we're seeing prop up, they're not formed with a lot of ideas. Or maybe at the top they are. If you look
one or two ideas, and that's all they need for a movement.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's dangerous.
But what happens when the dust settles? Let's say we go ahead and, like, my idea is you have these signature protests that are going to happen, and there's going to be agents, that provocateurs that work for the government, that create the violence and create the mob mentalities, and then you're going to have some deaths, and you're going to have some heroes, and you're going to have some villains. What's the end game?
There is no end to a destructive mindset like that. You got to keep this in mind. The treachery that drives an ideology like what's being pushed into the American society today, the treachery that is its DNA, is what makes up the blood of those who's driving it. So they cannot but betray. There's only one thing they can do, and that is betray. And once they're done betraying you, they will then betray the people they use to betray you. And then they will betray, they continue to fracture further and further and further and further and further. Keep finding more to betray until there's nothing left to eat but themselves. That's the danger of that kind of a mindset. It is an ultimately zero-sum, destructive mindset.
So how do we defeat that?
This goes back again to what I said before. You got to keep the intelligence level down if you want them to do that. If you want people to become a mob, you have to keep their intelligence level down, right?
Yeah.
This comes down to personal responsibility, making a personal decision. Think for yourself. Look for the answers they're not telling you. Look for wisdom, you know?
And there's a lot of people seeking that right now. And I think there's more.
There's not a whole lot of people seeking wisdom anymore. They're looking for knowledge. They're looking for information, and it's not the same.
Well, I think there's more people interested in something other than the current circumstance. And there's more people at home looking at these the riots and the protests and shaking their head and saying, I would never get involved inside that mess, there's no point, than there are actually people out there rioting and protesting. And I also would say that the most of the people that are part of that movement are either young, and it's very easy to manipulate the youth.
Naive.
And young and naive, or they're academics, and it's part of their plan. It's literally something they're orchestrating.
Right.
You know.
One of the things that you got to be careful with is the idea that I would never.
Sure.
Because the problem with I would never is that you never know. It's...
Well, where's that idea introduced, I would never? I'm just saying that most of the people...
Oh, no, you were referring to like the people sitting at home watching it on TV going, I would never do that.
I don't think that they're saying I would never. I just think that they're waiting this out and they're hoping for something better to emerge out of all this dysfunction.
Well, the only thing that they can do is just start being proactive about it. Start teaching. Start teaching your young. Start teaching your kids. The government wants to be in 100% control of everything about your kids. They want to control what your kids think. They want to control how your kids feel. They want to control the decisions that they make so that they can control the mob that your kid becomes a part of. Mm-hmm. If you, as the parent, will become proactive in the interaction with your children, these children do not belong to the state. They may on paper, thanks to the government, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are property. These are people. People are more important than what they can do for you. They have an inherent value. Mm-hmm. And if they are born from you, the parent, then you're the one who's supposed to be guiding them. And that means you're going to have to be the one to grow. Because if you can't grow, they can't learn to grow. From one thing, know 10,000. Miyamoto Musashi. From one thing, know 10,000. And we're not being taught that. We're being taught what to know.
What I see happening from all this dysfunction is that on large, I believe you're correct. The end game is deceit is going to continue to pull another one on the next person in line, and eventually the snake is going to eat its own tail.
Right. The Ouroboros.
But on a smaller level, with like local government, I believe we're going to see some sovereign nations within our greater nation. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see people saying, hey, look, we need to create a society. We need to create a community that's outside of this larger corrupt government.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that might start with the church. If if you're a religious person, that might start with a commune. That might start with a seat as at the next city of commerce meeting or town hall or local government. Mm-hmm. But I think people are going to start realizing it's got to start at home. Mm-hmm. And you just said that. It's got to start at home. And then it's got to branch out into local government or local community. And we got to start creating some examples. Mm-hmm. Like, as we said inside, maybe I think it was one of the first episodes we did together. If you want to change the world, you got to start with yourself, and then
you got to change how you see the world.
Once you start to envision a better world, you got to be proactive with that.
Exactly.
And if you get a community together that says, "Hey, I want to be accountable for every tax dollar that I'm given," as a committee, as a treasurer of that city,
right? And
they start to make that money more traceable, or hey, let's rethink the curriculum of school since we're all sitting at home. Maybe we should just scrape the whole curriculum as it is and start teaching these kids what they really need to learn.
Exactly.
And we need to start.
But the problem with that
reinventing society.
Exactly. That's the thing, is we have to start reinventing society. You get a fine for pulling your kid out of school, don't pay it. What are they going to do?
Right.
Right? But see, that's the thing. We ultimately, the smallest viable unit is the family, but the individual is what drives it. Okay? And there's that old quote from Mr. Spock from the old Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
Where the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. No. The needs of the many depend on the needs of the few or the one. Because if that one will take accountability, so you got to understand how the hive mind works, or how that.
Well, it's a self-sacrifice. You can't create a ritual sacrifice. If you decide.
But when we're talking about taking personal responsibility, then you influence the person next to you to take personal responsibility, and he influences the 2 next to him, and they influence the 4 and 6 next to them.
Right.
And then it starts to spread from there. But it's a matter of who's going to take that responsibility. And what is the responsibility that you have to take? And at what point does that responsibility bleed over into the society? We have to sit here and go, I am taking responsibility for my family. Well, why? Because my family is the society of the future. And when I take responsibility for my family, I stand at the doorway of 1,000 generations of those who will learn from that example. But if I continue to be a corrupt little animal, right? I'm now standing at the doorway of the next 3 and 4 that will continue to be self-worshiping little demigods that will continue to destroy. Are you sure you want to be a part of that? Which looks better? 4 more generations of destruction or 1,000 generations of creation?
Sure, and we all have our blind spots too, because you think of these great ideas like manifest destiny, and then you look back and with a Monday quarterback in that game plan, and you're like, well, you kind of
right?
You kind of screwed a lot of people over with that. So I think to be human is to flaw, and to flaw is to be human, but we can't fall in love with these ideas once we start to see them turn negative. I mean, a big theme right now is the environment. And we
science is still out on that, whether or not they claim it is.
Yeah, and I would say when it comes to science, we need to.
Science is supposed to be a question.
Well, we need
not
to,
absolute.
We need to start holding science accountable, and the only way we'll be able to hold science accountable is if we know a little bit of science ourselves.
Right.
And I know as a
Get government
reseller,
out of science.
The interest in science is very low. So for things that have a scientific background that I find to sell,
You know why?
I have a hard time moving that.
You know why?
Why is that?
The thinking man makes a terrible slave.
Well, the thinking man makes a terrible slave. So most people are
Keep him from thinking.
right. No one wants to look
buy
into
useless
it.
crap.
And when you have people exploring ideas like the flat earthers, and everybody
Can't believe we brought them up.
everybody scoffs at the flat earthers, but what I see is people that are doing their own form of science. They're actually
But they're chasing
they're chasing experiments, and they're
chasing
questioning
an ideology, though.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, it's an ideology, and there's a reason it's out there. It goes back to the information
It's
control.
an ideology of skepticism.
Beyond that, it goes back to the information control.
Well,
They
what's beyond that?
Well,
What's beyond being a skeptic that the mainstream narrative of science, as we're seeing with this whole
There's only
COVID
certain
situation,
things-
isn't necessarily true.
there's only certain things you're allowed to skepticize on. To be
Why?
a skeptic on. So you're not allowed to be a skeptic on COVID. You're not allowed to be a skeptic on, but you are allowed to be a skeptic on gender, on how many genders there are.
Well, you're also not allowed to be a skeptic on what is beyond Antarctica.
No, you are. You can be a skeptic on that, but the idea...
those ideas are banned on YouTube. If we were talking about what I think you're talking about, what ideas...
No, they're not, actually. No.
They're harder to find. I've seen people's videos taken down that are on that subject.
On flat Earth? Oh! No, I have heard about this. They were starting to ban that.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I have heard about this. Yeah, no.
Well, when you look into
Right.
flat Earth, and I have looked into flat Earth, and I'm not a flat Earther, but I do feel like
But they didn't act on
they
banning
raised
that
some
nearly as
they
quickly
raised
as...
some interesting questions.
And also some really dumb ones, too.
That's fair enough.
Right?
That's fair enough. But they do raise some interesting questions. And when you look into governments like NASA, and we basically did us and the German, or not the Germans, but the Russians, we pretty much drafted all the German scientists, and we took some of them and we put them inside NASA and some other science organizations, and they did the same with their space program.
Right. Project Paperclip.
Right, Project Paperclip, and then now you have this beautiful. I got to see it for myself now. Being here inside Houston, this beautiful organization in this land that just keeps on getting tons of money, but it's so secretive, and they don't share much with us of what they're doing, and they've lost a lot of the information that they have, and I mean that information creates a lot of something in your brain sometimes just pops when you've been lied to so many times. I think that's what kind of happens with the flat earthers, is they've been lied to about everything, and they look at these the moon landing and the way that it was videotaped. Maybe the moon landing was real, but at the same time, it was a stage production. Of what we see that was the moon landing. I'm almost 100% sure that was staged. I just don't know if the actual...
We don't know for sure if there was a moon landing.
If there was a moon landing.
Right. And, I'm kind of... My thing is I don't really touch those subjects because when you're dealing with ideologues, it is impossible to talk to them. But as far as... my thing is this. The what and the who are fodder for the spectator. It's the why no one wants you to ever ask. Why are we questioning these things?
Right.
It's like, I'm not really concerned about whether or not the earth is flat or globe.
Yeah, I don't care so much
whether or not my family's going to survive. I'm more concerned about whether or not my family's going to survive being called kulaks from here on out. That's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about real issues. I'm not concerned about fantasy issues. Oh, we live on a flat disk. Cool. Did you know that because you're white, you're racist? This is an issue.
Well, I guess it becomes an issue depending on what circles you walk in. Because fortunately for me, and I'm, I think I look white, but my mom's, Mexican.
My grandfather was Mexican.
But no one ever thinks I'm Mexican. And no one also has ever accused me of being a racist or whatnot.
Right.
And maybe that's just because of the perception. Maybe it's the way I dress.
It's probably that. But that's the thing.
I'm not quite sure what it is. But I don't live in a world where people are telling me what I can and I can't say.
Yeah.
I don't live in a world where people are calling me evil. I live in a black neighborhood, and no one's saying, "Hey, white guy,
nobody ever said it to me until
you're doing that." And if they did, I'd probably feel sorry for them because they'd be pretty much, wrong on the spectrum, on that end.
Right.
But I'm also pretty old, so although I've met racist people. I've also found that if you have a little bit more conversation with those people and you break through their hard exterior, most of them will say, well, I'm really not racist. I just say racist things and have some racist ideas. But if you can break past that exterior, I actually probably like you.
Right.
And I met black people. I met black people like that. I met white people like that. And usually a sense of guilt and shame starts to come into shape. And they're like, I'm not really, because then once you express to them, you think what they're saying is kind of crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
They start to realize, well, I don't really feel this way. I just sometimes feel this way when I'm emotionally triggered.
Right. And that's the thing. You got to get past the persona, and sometimes you got to start asking them questions. You got to start asking them why questions. Oh, black people, this, that, and does. Why?
But do you really think racism is one of the biggest issues in our country, or is that just what the mainstream media is pushing?
The mainstream media,
they don't have much of else to grasp onto.
They don't have anything else to say but racism. That's the thing. The mainstream media racism isn't really the issue anymore.
Well, isn't
They're
it
trying to
strange that
create
the
it
mainstream
into this.
media is funded and owned by China?
Oh, yeah.
And China's
Oh,
one of
yeah.
the most racist countries inside the world.
Yeah, and xenophobic. Yeah, and many of the news media outlets, including CNN, they're owned by China. But see, racism isn't really the issue. The issue is identity, I think.
Right.
I think the issue comes down to, who are you at your core? Do you know? And if you don't know, then you will always be subject to superficial ideologies that tell you what to think about yourself and what to think about others.
I don't know who I am at my core.
You need to buy my book.
Because what I would find, I would say I'm defined by my boundaries, not by that core essence. Because what I find about that core essence is it's a variable, and that core essence is constantly evolving and changing. And depending on what day I wake up, I feel like I'm different things, and I'm okay with that. In fact, that's the creative part of me, that creative spark that I enjoy. But the things that I'm not, and I will not participate or want to allow myself to be, that is more of what defines me. My limitations define me more than by the definition of that thing.
Right. And that can be useful to a certain degree, but one thing that I've found is that, so what was that discussion that John Locke had, that our identity is really rooted more in our values and how we value things and how we rank order things in order of importance.
That seems so basic to be an identity.
Well, you'd be surprised though. You'd be surprised, because what do we value in this country anymore?
Well, as a personal point of view, I think that's a better question of what do we value, because I can't speak for the country.
Right.
I can tell you I value my relationship with my wife and my family foremost. That's the most important thing. The second thing, I value my health. I found that out this year, that my health is way more important than I thought.
It's up there somewhere.
I was sick for 2 months plus. And I couldn't kick it. It was just not the worst illness I ever had, but it was there for a long time and made me think about those things. And then, after I do that, I value what I can bring to the table. That is probably, the third thing I value, what I can offer. I don't want to be here anymore if I'm not valuable.
Right.
I got other places to be. Right. I don't need to be here on this planet if I can't bring anything to the table.
And how easily are you offended?
Not
very easily?
No.
That's good. There's in my book, and we'll talk about that another time, but in my book I explore how deep the relationship with our identity actually goes. It goes beyond just the values.
Okay. Yeah, I would think so.
It goes into our past.
Yeah.
And it shows us how our suffering shapes us.
Sure.
And then
that's where I would talk about boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things about the identity is that your identity is set in stone. This is something
you've told me this before.
This is set in stone. This is something that it is a part of you. It is, and it is unchangeable. It isn't changing, but what it does do is it's always revealing something new to you that you didn't know before. Sure. Even to the point beyond your death, there will still be undiscovered things about your identity that if you were to go on a search, who am I? What was created by the things that I went through?
Yeah.
Okay? What was created by being disowned at birth for me?
Okay.
What was created by coming up in a narcissistic home? What was created by the slavery that I went through? What was created by the abuses that I faced dealing with my own naivety growing up and coming out of that situation? What did all of this create? And now, once I've discovered that, my next step is, okay, now I need to say all of that suffering, the effects, the negative effects of it are now dead today. So that now, this is the present, that was the past. This is the present. Now, moving to the future, I can have a relationship with the future that is functional, that works, both works for me, works for my family, works for society.
Yeah, well, that seems like a good blueprint. But coming from someone like myself, that you could relate to this too. I've changed my name a bunch of times. And I do think identity is pretty elusive. So I've tend for my own sanity to define myself more by the things I'm not willing to do. And some basic value systems that I hope most people share with me.
Right.
And then the rest of it, yeah, you're right. You got to look at your past. You got to look at the things that have shaped you.
Hope hides at home where the greatest sins are committed.
Hope hides at home where the greatest sins are committed.
All the hell we suffered was at home. That's where our hope is. Because then we can go and create our own home and have our chance at that. At formulating from there.
Right.
A whole nation from there, if enough people were to do it. Hope hides at home where the greatest sins are committed.
Well, there's some food for thought.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of Reasonable Dissent.
This was a good episode. Good talk.
Yeah,
I
nice
like
talk,
this.
man.
That was damn good, huh?
Yeah. We should do this again.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe next week. I don't know. We'll find out. Thanks for tuning in. You guys have fun.